The president is at a stalemate with Democratic leaders over funding for his wall along the border with Mexico. For days, President Trump has threatened to declare a national emergency in order to secure funding. During a roundtable at the White House Friday, the president said he would hold off to give Congress more time to come to an agreement. But a new CBS poll shows 67% of Americans say he should not take emergency action. And only 34% of Americans believe there is a crisis along the border. Leslie Sanchez is a CBS News contributor and Republican strategist, and Zeke Miller is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. He is at the White House. Zeke, we'll start with you. Earlier, the president hosted a roundtable where he stated that he would not yet declare the situation at the border a national emergency. He has been threatening emergency action for days. Why do you think he's waiting now?
Well, the indication we're getting is that the president's advisors want to use the national emergency as the option of last resort. It's the most risky for a president. This president, really any president, it opens Pandora's box from a legal perspective. If you can declare a national emergency for something like the border, you can declare a national emergency for a lot of other things. It sets a dangerous precedent from that view. The other one is that it's almost certain to face legal challenge where its future is not quite certain. So for the president, he wants to have this fight with Congress. He believes he's winning, and he's said that a number of times. He believes he's winning in this confrontation with Democrats on Capitol Hill, that his voters, certainly his base, want him to fight for this wall, this barrier now on the border. So why would he do that? It would be seen as not necessarily a capitulation to Democrats, but if he believes he's winning this fight, why not fight a little bit longer and maximize that leverage against Democrats? That's not sort of the consensus view in Washington and in some of the limited polling we've seen. But if from the president's perspective, that's why he's not right now declaring that national emergency.
Leslie, GOP leaders are somewhat divided over the issue of border wall, border barrier, border fencing funding. Is this causing a rift among Republicans?
It's causing the same kind of tension that Donald Trump has always brought to the Republican Party. I mean, as early as the primary. There is a certain style and an orthodox approach that the president takes that is very difficult for Republican establishment to get used to. The question becomes, is it effective, and what is the cost of going against the president? Because, I mean, realistically, not only are they looking at their internal numbers from a state perspective if they have races in 2020, but the power of the Trump machine in terms of raising money and ensuring he doesn't support a primary challenger. So all of those political pieces are a reality, and he's still learning how to work with Congress, and it's something that any new president is going to need to master, but there's a very steep learning curve with this particular
Well,
one.
and there's understandable pressure to back your Republican president, even if you might not agree with some of his tactics.
That's Republicans. Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line, that old expression that they have. And we tend to see that. And even among Republicans who tend to be contrarians or centrist and kind of step away from the party and show that they're going to have a dissenting view, they ultimately, for the most part, tend to fall back in line. Those concessions are made, and that compromise. The question and the challenge here, and I'd throw it to Zeke too, is when you're looking at those numbers and people being very frustrated with the shutdown, it's still highly partisan. You're still seeing 8 in 10 Republicans support what the president's doing in terms of standing his ground, and a high percentage of Democrats support what they're doing. So where is that going to break, and who's going to benefit?
Well, the president said in a roundtable that many people are on his side. Let's listen to that for just a second and see what he said.
I was watching this morning and reading this morning that so many people are saying the president is doing what's right, and even though it's affecting us.
Zeke, I'm going to throw this one to you. A recent CBS poll says otherwise. What is the strategy here from the president?
Well, certainly the president's core base of supporters is on his side. Every poll that we have seen over the last couple of years shows that the president is very popular among Republican-based voters. And if you look at the way he ran the 2018 midterm elections for his party, it was that calculation that it was a base turnout election. It was not about persuading the middle. It was about turning out the people who agree with him. So from the president's perspective, that's that's the magic bullet for him winning again in 2020, is keeping those core Trump supporters on board. But this isn't about a campaign. This is about public opinion more broadly with governing. And there is certainly a broad-based, even among Trump supporters, there is a there are some concerns about the shutdown. There are Trump supporters who are federal employees who are not getting paid today, who are seeing zeros on their pay stubs, who are not happy and are telling reporters about that. And that's rubbing off on the president. So I think, some of this is a bit of bravado from the, we've seen that, that truthful hyperbole is a line he writes about in his book all the time. If you say it enough, it becomes true to a certain extent. If the president, I think to a certain extent here, is saying that if he says he's winning this shutdown fight enough, then maybe he's coming out, he'll come out ahead, he'll be better off for it.
Well, and it was certain members of the conservative media whose outrage over him capitulating at first changed his mind and made him decide that he wanted to stand firm. But Zeke, it does not now look like Congress will be reaching an agreement to fund for the border wall anytime soon. Besides declaring a national emergency, what options does the president have to begin building this thing immediately?
Well, we could see the president do what he did a couple of months ago when he sent federal troops down to the border. And they put up some concertina wire and some other fencing. That's one of the options that's currently being considered, another deployment of active duty troops down there to do that. There are other potential funds that could be moved around short of a national emergency. They're talking about that. There'd be some questionable legality, also questionable consequences where he'd be taking the funds away from. Certainly there's a lot of blowback today over using a national emergency to take funds away from disaster relief programs. They're looking at some other targets. But at the end of the day, if the president wants to make good on his campaign promise to actually build a physical barrier along the border, and even the national emergency wouldn't solve his full problem. If he wants to do that by 2020, he's going to need Congress on his side, and right now they're not there, and there's really no indication that they'll ever be there right now.
So let's be objective for a moment here. Senator Schumer and Leader Pelosi have said they are standing firm, and the president's being completely unreasonable. There's no way he's going to get a wall. But has he compromised in his language at least? He has said, I don't care if it's a fence, the metal slats. Has he backed away from the wall, and is he getting credit for having done that kind of a compromise?
Well, the interesting part, if you speak to people that were at a private meeting with Senator Corner and Senator Cruz, who were part of these discussions with the president, they were telling their constituents that he will negotiate on what that physical barrier looks like. Yeah. Landowners, ranchers, people that have private property on the U.S.-Mexico border, there's over 1,000 pieces of private property. These individuals are concerned about an inch-by-inch wall that doesn't make a lot of sense. They want a combination of barriers, technology, capital reinforcement, infrastructure, and environmental. Remove some of that cane that is so difficult that the coyotes use to smuggle and do a lot of the trafficking routes. If they can do that, I think the Democrats are feasible, can say they want border security. We agree. Just what type of wall? A wall is what kind of wall?
That's the trigger word right there, isn't it? He ran on a wall, and he ran on a wall that Mexico was going to pay for. Now he has somewhat backed off of that and said that they will indirectly pay for it with the savings from this great deal that he signed with Mexico and Canada. But how important is that word wall going to be when he runs in 2020?
The bigger issue, it's not just important because it's the wall, it's because it's a promise Republicans have made consistently going back to the 80s to the base that they would deliver on border security, and they have failed. They failed that the president, Ronald Reagan, failed when he declared amnesty. They failed in 1996 when they started another immigration reform, and they've consistently, even with the 2006, secure fencing, they've failed to secure that properly as well. For legal reasons, for a lot of other reasons, and because the narco traffickers and such and the drugs are more sophisticated in some cases than a slow bureaucracy. Yeah. So there's not a lot of light there. The president is basically understanding the pulse of the people. They want something done.
Well, and he had 2 years of Republican-held Congress and was not able to get it done then. So now the Democrats have the House. It's making it even more difficult for him. Zeke, let's turn now to Syria and the troop withdrawal. The military has already started removing equipment from Syria. Is there a timeline now to begin withdrawing troops?
There isn't really, and that's the challenge. Both internally, talking to White House officials, talking to the Pentagon and others, there's no firm deadline here. And if talking to Ambassador Bolton, I've just returned from a trip to the Middle East with him a couple days ago. He made clear that timelines are not a thing that this administration likes to do. They like to set conditions on the ground. And one of the things that we saw from him is that he sort of added in a whole bunch of conditions that really weren't apparent when the president laid out the Syria withdrawal plan about a month ago, where he said that the U.S. would finally knock out what remains of the territorial caliphate of ISIS in Syria, and then also separately would protect its allies, namely particularly the Kurds, who face an assault from Turkey, which considers some of the U.S. allies there on the ground to be terrorists in their country. It's not clear that really that second condition will be met anytime soon, and that will determine just some of the pace of the withdrawal. But certainly on the first run, in terms of defeating what remains physically of ISIS on the ground, that's something that the White House believes can be accomplished really in the next 5 or 6 weeks. And then the withdrawal, at least some of the withdrawal taking place. Certainly, the fate of the Kurds is one that a lot of folks in Washington they have been mistreated by the United States and made promises that have never been fulfilled for decades now. That's something that there's a lot of concern over. But the withdrawal will take place. But exactly when the last U.S. troops will leave is undetermined right now.
All right, Leslie, battle lines closer to home. President Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, has agreed to testify before Congress in February. The president has kind of poo-pooed it like it's no big deal. His current lawyer has poo-pooed it, said not worried at all. Really, what do you think?
No, I think any reasonable person would be worried, especially somebody that had such internal knowledge and was such the deal maker, particularly for him personally. So as much as people want to discount it, I will say this is where Republicans and Democrats, independents all agree. They want to see where the full, pulling the string to see ultimately where this goes. And I think many people are keeping their powder dry, so to speak, on making a judgment until they hear all the different testimony and all the pieces are put together. And the question is, will we ever know all of it? Meaning the Mueller report, will we ever see the light of day and know all these pieces? But I do think it's part of a larger puzzle, and people are waiting to hear before they make a judgment.
Yeah, Zeke, this is something that we really have never seen before. This kind of a high-level, inner sanctum kind of person who had access to a lot of what was happening with the president even before he was elected. What's going on behind the scenes in the White House? We know what their public comments are, but is this really causing a lot of turmoil in there?
It's certainly, getting a bunch of people worried. It's certainly a couple of news cycles that they're not going to own. And we know that one thing about this president is that he likes to sort of be the center of attention in every which way. At the same time, I did hear an interesting take. Sort of maybe this is sort of looking at it through rose-colored glasses, and sort of it's the sunny side up perspective here, which is potentially that maybe the American public will see the real Michael Cohen, which from the White House's perspective, from the president's perspective, is a admitted criminal and an admitted liar, and maybe who has lied to Congress, admittedly doing that, and and that will be that he'll be his credibility will be on trial here before the Congress, and that's something that maybe will give the president a bit of some upside there. That one of his prominent accusers, sort of allies turned accusers now, is facing his own legal jeopardy and may not be truthful in the eyes of the public. Michael Cohen has some very, very talented lawyers and advisors behind him now. Lanny Davis, who defended Bill Clinton inside the White House in the 90s. So he's probably going to be very prepared for those questions. So that may not be where they want to place their hope, but that just might be, trying to make the best of a situation that they can't control.
Well, if you think the last episode of The Sopranos had a lot of viewers, I think this is going to have a few eyeballs watching too. Zeke Miller, Leslie Sanchez, thank you so much. Very interesting.
Thank you.